Good morning, and welcome back to our third session of this week with Dr. Sun Kwon. Um, we have an exciting presentation actually today titled Managing Unconscious Bias. My name is Andy Villanueva, Director of Adventist Community Service here for the Oregon Conference, and I'm joined with Laura Pasco, who's the Director of Portland Adventist Community Services. Before we get into today's message, I want to remind you that we still have a meeting at 10 o'clock where it's going to be a panel discussion forum. And so I want to invite you, if you have any questions on this topic right now or even going into our 10 o'clock, submit your questions via Facebook or YouTube. We'll make sure to pass those on to Dr. Sun Kwon. But we'll just pass this time on now to you, Doctor.
Good morning. How are you?
Good morning.
Doing well.
I am good deal. I am grateful to be here once again and talking about one of my favorite topic. To me, the culture is just fascinating. The study, when you're interacting with the people, you interact with the different values, different worldview, and different perspective of lives. That excites me, sometimes and then often actually they challenge my worldview, challenge my values and perspective, and which I love it. If we just talk to people that has same values, same perspective, same worldview, I'm not so sure whether we will enjoy what is like part of the kingdom of God with all nations. So this topic has been very interesting for me for over the years, and since this morning, I don't have time to go through all 6 modules. This is basically 8 hours worth of lecture material, but I'm going to just give you introductory so you can have some sort of idea what this cultural intelligence is all about. So before we begin, what is culture? Well, culture is, someone said, culture is the software of mind. So it's basically influenced through shared beliefs, values, assumptions of a group of people who learn from one another and teach others that their behaviors and attitudes and perspectives are, correct or different. And the way we think and act and feel, yeah, it's all different because that culture influences. So when you say culture, it's not just one thing. It's kind of make up of all these factors that influencing national, ethnic, professional, organizational, generational, religious, whatnot. So we tend to develop a bias, whether it is unconscious or conscious, we develop bias. So when we develop this unconscious bias, we need to learn how to manage because that is for efficacy. When we have greater understanding of cultural differences, it will motivate us to reduce impact of unconscious bias. And so when you apply cultural intelligence in a proper way, you will have a healthier relationship, in a better way to relate to others. But when you reach out to community, you are dealing with a community with a much diversified environment. So in knowing, the community that you're dealing with, you will have better strategy how to relate to them. Because culture is different. I mean, in fact, there were study done in America. Most fearful thing for peers, like and the teenagers, is the peer pressures. Peer pressures are number one, threat among teenagers. But when you're talking to like Koreans, what is number one threat? Teenagers. Well, failing in academia, because in Korea it's a very competitive society. You have to take an exam to go to high school and the college, and then applying for a job, you got to take entrance exam for the job. So failing academic setting is most stressful. So we have a high suicide. So each yeah, culture, nationality, dealing with the different types of challenges. So this was quite of interesting research that was done last 15 years. And asking over 50 different countries, public, private, non-profit sector leadership, what is the difference between the individuals and organizations that succeed in today's globalized multicultural world and that fails. So what is that secret ingredient that some people are successful, some people are failing? Surprisingly, the answer was a CQ. It was a cultural intelligence. 80% of the respond from that research, people said the CQ makes a difference. Yeah, it's not IQ or EQ, but CQ. The CQ stands for cultural intelligence, the capability to function effectively across various cultural contexts. So dealing with people with different nationality, different ethnicity, different organizational culture and generation. How do you relate to them? So the scientists today are saying, in order to be successful, you cannot just rely on high IQ, or in a high EQ, which is the emotional intelligence. And then SQ is a social intelligence, which is problem solving. How do you manage conflict? Those are the social intelligence. But nevertheless, research said CQ is the key factor. The more you understand the people that you work with, that you interact with, you will have a better success individually and organizationally. In fact, the Harvard Business, the review, they done a similar study and they came to the same conclusion. The cultural intelligence engages and leverages the power of diverse teams. So if you want to have a diversified, a team, enhancing its capacity and enhancing their capacity to the maximum level, we really have to focus on CQ, enhancing the CQ. So their study concluded quite interesting. It's a diversity times CQ, cultural intelligence, you will have a greater positive result, greater effectiveness. So they are saying diversity equals creativity. So when you do not recognize and value diversity, you will not have creativity. So the study shows if you have mono thinking culture, everyone look like you, talk like you, behavior like you, eat like you, you will not have much of a creativity in that environment. So we need to learn to embrace the differences, because the London is a city, most diversified city in the whole world. And then London is known for what? Creativity. Like Paris is known for fashion, New York, Tokyo, Korea, known for technology. So the London represents that creativity because they have embraced the differences. So Harvard review says, if you do not recognize the value of diversity and you do not develop the cultural intelligence, and then you will end up having a whole lot of unconscious bias. Exactly. So we really need to be conscious about this. So when your organization, behaves with lots of conflict, conflict and struggle with this unconscious bias, it's pretty much your organization have not embraced the diversity, and you have not, fully committed to developing cultural intelligence. So There are two types of bias, in fact. One we call explicit bias. This is in a conscious level bias. Attitudes and beliefs we have about personal group on conscious level. I believe Samsung phone is the best phone ever made in Korea. People brag about iPhone. I feel sorry for them. This is explicit bias. Yes, and I'm proud of it too. But there's other part is unconscious bias. This is what we call implicit bias. It's unintended, subtle, subconscious thoughts that happens to all of us much of the time. So people who brag about the Apple phone, yeah, they are very much in implicit bias, unconscious. Wow. So we would like to believe we are open-minded, fair, and without bias. But research shows otherwise. This is an important, even if uncomfortable realization for most of us. Seriously, everyone has a bias. Whether you are intentional or not intentional, but you do have explicit and implicit bias. So I'm not saying one is better than the other. We just need to learn how to manage those unconscious bias, implicit bias, so that we can balance that with explicit bias. Have had any negative conclusion, like when you jump into the negative conclusion when you face something, unfamiliar or something that I don't know, made you uncomfortable. Like there was a young lady, I was actually watching this thing quite closely. This man, older man, opened the door for her, and this younger man, I mean, young lady, I think she was probably early 20, and the man was around about 50. And then he opened the door for her and said, "Go right ahead, ma'am," you know, gently. Yeah. And so this young lady had a kind of interesting facial expression, and I thought that was nice. Older man opened up the door for her and said, "Go right ahead, ma'am." I thought that was being polite, but she took it in a totally different. She said, he is sexiest. She felt that there was some degree of a sexism. Why you treat me like uh, uh, inferior? It's like I open my own door. You don't have to do that for me. That sort of attitude. But the man was being a gentle. So he was just being a polite. But she took it wrong way because some past experience perhaps relate to that incident. Pictures like this, when you see this black man with a white woman in the car sitting like that, some people immediately think there's a pimp, there's a prostitute. But when you see the title Jimmy Choo is one of the world's famous fashion designer. Some people are probably familiar with some brand's name. I don't know all that, but it's a fashion designer. So they see what that picture represents. And here, this lady with black eye, immediately people will come to a conclusion: oh, domestic violence victim. But she is actually mixed martial artist. She compete with the people with this mixed martial art. So sometimes we just looking at the pictures, we jump into a conclusion because of our previous, encounterment or understanding. So that's what we call intuitive thinking. It's very unconscious. It's automatic response. It's a very emotional response, and there's no effort into it. I go to we have a 1,358 ACS centers North American division. There are times that I go with the jeans and shirt, just visiting them, and people look at me immediately. Oh, here's a Chinese guy delivering some Chinese food. That sort of a response is very unconscious, very intuitive thinking. But when I show up with the ties and suit, they think I'm a doctor. Why? Because they have developed rational thinking. This is conscious level, and it's a deliberate and systematic. So people who with a suit and tie, they must have done something well in academia, and maybe achieved the status, and so this Asian guy must be a doctor. Yeah, that's how they relate to the people. So what we have to do is it's okay. It's natural for us to have this intuitive thinking response. It's a natural, it's something. It's there. We as a human being, when we're looking at some individuals, or looking at some objects, or hearing the name of the country like North Korea. Yeah, uh, evil right there. Yeah, I'm from South Korea. Awesome, right? Yeah. So there's some sort of image or stigma or some value that are attached to it, and we respond immediately. But that's okay. But we need to actually connect that dot with the rational thinking. If we don't connect the dots between the intuitive thinking and the rational thinking, then you will become prejudiced. You will become, racist. You will become sexist. Does that make sense to you? So you have to learn how to slow down your immediate response, and learn how to process through analytical and the conceptual skill set. We call it rational thinking. And then when you begin to do that, you will have actually healthier organization. So so let's see, this is how it goes. Activation of bias thoughts in system one, that intuitive thinking, happens to everyone based on human brain function, based on your upbringing, your environment, your culture, and so forth. So that has to be connected to a system two, intentional application, cultural intelligence. Why he's thinking that way? Maybe this person is having a XYZ, perhaps respond because of their culture and their so you have this rational thinking process. But if you skip step number two, then you will have nothing but bias. So this is why you have to connect intuitive thinking to rational thinking. Then you can actually have avoid those conscious bias, unconscious bias altogether. So the bottom line is, the higher the cultural intelligence that you have developed, you will have lesser, unconscious bias. So more you're struggling with this, conscious bias issue, you really need to actually learn how to manage. We all have bias. Once again, the bias impacts individuals and organizations. That everyone can learn to manage bias by applying cultural intelligence. Why should we care? Well, even in the workplace, when you have a higher, cultural intelligence and the lesser unconscious bias, you will have a greater multicultural interaction. You will begin to enjoy, having a conversation, and seeing different views and different perspectives. And Laura just told me that there is an Indian restaurant nearby the Gladstone, and she likes to go there and even enjoy the fake meat. I mean, not the fake meat. Those veggie meat. Which is good. Oh, that's awesome, because she is expanding her the scope of interaction beyond her ethnicity, her culture, her comfort zone. So that's exciting. And then when you have appreciation for higher cultural intelligence, then you will actually hire and retain those talents outside of your homogeneous society, and the people will be more dedicated, and they will be more innovative and creative, because you have created that safe environments that welcomes people with a different perspective and different way of approaching. Not everyone is thinking linearly. Some people like to think dimensionally, which is fine. uh, Let me just show you. Let's say this is the paper, and I would have a dot or here and the dot back here. And if I ask you to connect these two dots, some people think linearly, they will draw the line. They will draw a curve or a straight line. But if you are thinking dimensionally, you will actually fold the papers and connect the dots. Because I asked you to connect the dots. I didn't ask you how to connect the dots, right? So we can be a more innovative, more creative if we embrace the differences, the diversity. In fact, the Harvard study that shows that 6 out of 10 employees say lack of emotional safety because of lack of that cultural intelligence, and then they have developed a whole lot of unconscious bias at work will make them quit a job immediately. You see that? Yeah. So, well, let me just give you an example here. Let's say, based on this, I'm going to show you 4 different individuals. All right. And you decide who you will hire, who will be your choice for senior level engineering position. Senior level engineering position. I will show you 4 different pictures, and you decide who you would like to hire. Number 1, option 1A is bright, very beautiful, young Asian lady. And then second will be, yeah, handsome, smiley, Caucasian man. And then C, oh, wow, I don't know how to describe it. My immediate reaction is maybe not all that positive. Okay. And then the fourth one, oh, definitely this is questionable. I don't know, what do you call it? Punk rock? Is that the 1970s or 80s? I'm not so sure. So out of these 4 individuals, who would you hire? Interestingly, they tested it over 100 individuals, and B, the Caucasian man, was a number 1 choice. And then number 2 was the young lady, the Asian lady, the A. And then C and D was equally lower, but they actually had more people saying, we don't want this, the guy with the star, marked on the forehead, punk rock. C is more preferable than a D. That was quite a very interesting, response that they had it. But interestingly, this guy right here that we just framed it as a punk rock, guess what? He graduated from MIT. He with a PhD in the physics and aerospace engineering. He was actually part of the Mars Science Lab, the Curiosity mission. He was a part of that team from MIT. But we are so external sometimes and superficial. So we look at the guy with the colors on hair and shaved like some kind of mahogany, Native American and all this stars shape tattoo. We made a conclusion: this guy is not the one that we want as a senior. Yeah. So the bottom line is, please don't judge too quickly. Do not respond with your intuitive thinking emotionally. That's very unconscious respond, and you will end up having lots of bias. So you have to connect intuitive thinking with the rational thinking. All right, I'm going to show you a video clip and see how you feel about this and what you see in this.
Familiar faces, worn out places, worn out faces, bright and early for their daily races, going nowhere, and their tears are filling up their glasses. No expression, no expression. Mad world, mad world.
Quite interesting, isn't it? What was your response? I thought that it was probably made by the man, the male chauvinistic perspective. They glorify the man as a hard worker, intelligent, team work, team player, and everything is so positive. Then we look at this lady with just, I think we just dehumanized her. She is, sexiest, and she is like just pussy around people, and I don't know. There was not much of the positive, aspects and attitude from this female boss. Why? Why we have that sort of attitude and a perspective? Well, because we grew up with this bias. He who is skilled with a hammer thinks that everything is nail. Isn't that true? Yeah. So this is why we have to grow. We have to grow and developing cultural intelligence by beginning with embracing the differences. I was driving through the South one day and I saw this sign. It said, "Caution, Asian drivers." Oh my goodness. Talking about unconscious bias. But that happens, you have probably went through this exercise program numerous times. One does look like a duck and the other look like a rabbit. And some people, believe it or not, they don't see both of them in this object. Some people only see duck. Some people only see a rabbit. And because they have not had a chance to develop broader, perspective and the way we approach things and the events. When you look at the picture on the left, that was a very controversial picture. People thought that he was cursing, showing a middle finger. The picture was taken from the side, and immediately over 100,000, tweeting, how dare he could be so rude and whatnot. But when you see the picture on the right, the picture was taken from the front view. He was pointing it out, holding out 3 fingers. But from the side, it looked like 1 finger, you see. But people made a decision right away, just looking at the first picture on the left, and then labeled him as a ruthless leader and, no respect for others. And how dare he cursing at people like that in the public. And I mean, it was just ugly, after they have seen that picture on the right. But the interesting thing was, all those people who said negatively about him, didn't apologize. Oh, that's so sad. But anyway, so make sure we need to learn to do not judge quickly. Do not judge quickly. Slow down your response and shifting the perspective. See differently. Perhaps we have to look at it things from behind the story. So when we do that, the biases can negatively impact all of us, individual organizations. But when you apply this, then we will manage the bias and in fact able to increase our cultural intelligence. So in order to do that, you begin with CQ drive. So CQ drive means you have to have an interest in people. You have to have an interest in their culture. You have to have an interest in their language. So this is why Ellen G. White said, in order to lead people to Christ, the Christ's method alone, right? It was mingling with the people and had a desire for their good. Exactly. You have to have drive. You have to have a passion for people. You have to see people as a precious soul that belong to God. You have to have interest in their, culture. When was the last time that you went out with someone totally out of your ethnicity, the race, and inviting them to a lunch and their choice of a restaurant, their nationality, Vietnamese and Ethiopian or Jamaican, and you name it. So don't go to a same restaurant and order same thing. If I have seen people doing that all the time. When they go to a Chinese restaurant, they order romaine, whatever, fried rice, and then they go to Indian restaurant, they order, whatever. They only order one thing. They don't, try anything else. That is actually a good sign that you need to work on your CQ drive. You got to have interest in others, differences, different culture, language. Then second is you have to develop CQ knowledge. CQ knowledge is what's the differences, what's the similarities. So you have a knowledge-based information that you have a better understanding, why they behave and how they behave. And then third is the CQ strategy. Not only you have a knowledge-based information, but now you have a better awareness and ability to plan multicultural interaction. So you have awareness of yourself, you have awareness of others, and you have awareness of the surrounding, the community. So you can actually develop better plan to relate to those people who are different than you are. One of the reasons why we as ethnic churches, like the Korean churches, are not doing well accepting other cultures in the community, because sometimes we're lacking that drive. We may not have it. We may have only passion for fellow Koreans, and sometimes we have this fear of unknown. We don't know anything about outside of a Korean culture. So the Hispanic, Jamaican, Haitian, we don't know how to deal with it. You see, so this is why you got to have a drive, a knowledge, and strategy. Then action, which means your ability to adapt when relating and working in multi context, because you have greater awareness of yourself and others and the environment. So you have greater efficacy, ability to relate the differences. So this right after this session, 10 o'clock, we will go over this 4 drive, knowledge, and strategy, and action in detail setting. In fact, we're going to take a look at some of the basic cultural differences, like a capitalist and socialist, and the kinship versus nuclear, and formal and informal legal system and education, and even religious system, rational. We are very rational religious system, Adventist, but Pentecostals are very mystical religious system. So you have to understand, and then solid and fluid, the system, artistic system. So we're going to go over some of those, and then also we will review value dimensions, basic value dimensions, like individualism versus collectivism, the high power versus low power. Certain cultures welcome uncertainty, avoidance, and some don't do well. Some people are more into cooperative, some people are more into competition. Some culture prefer short-term engagement. Some culture, they think everything is long-term. And sometimes, we speak, we express, we communicate directly, or some others are, preferably indirect engagement. And there's a difference between being culture and doing culture, and universalism versus particularism, and then neutral society and effective society, and monochronic and polychronic. So we're going to go over some of those at 10 o'clock. So if you have interested in developing cultural intelligence, please come back. Why all this is necessary? Because most of the time we interact with the people very externally and superficially. When people see individuals with a certain dress code, behavior, we immediately make a judgment call based on our intuitive thinking rather than rational thinking. So when you begin to understand their journey of life, their value and their socioeconomic status, their education, all that, then you will have actually better rational thinking. This is the reason why building relationship with the people takes time. Yeah, you have to understand. You cannot just generalize it. My son, he is Korean American, and he got, I think, a B or something in math, and I was like so upset. How can you, as a Korean, second generation, getting a B on the math. You got to have A. My blood type is A plus. Having B is not acceptable. And I was all mad at him. And then my son said, "Daddy, I'm American." What? What? So that was all joking. But because he is a Korean, that doesn't mean he will always have A in math. Sometimes my wife and I will go to a small church visiting. Immediately, people come to my wife and ask her to play piano for the worship service. My wife does not play piano. She plays flute, not piano. But people just assume because I'm pastor and my wife, has to be Korean wife, wife of a pastor. Yeah, she knows how to play piano. See, that sort of unconscious bias we need to be avoided. See, this picture here is quite interesting. Most people think that, well, guy who bought a brand new car and he didn't want to make any scratch on his car, so he parked it on double side. Some people think that is like arrogant and all negative stuff, mostly negative response. But the reality is, it's she, not he. She went to airport and they had a snowstorm, heavy snowstorm, covered entire airport. Could not find any parking space, so she found the tiny space that she was able to fit her car in that space, and then parked it and went to business trip. Came back 2 weeks later, all the snows melted away. Guess what? She found her car right there, sitting just like that. Yeah, but what we did, we just assumed instead of asking what was the environment like, what was the circumstances, what was the reason for this. We just jumped right into conclusion. Bad guy, with a selfish motive, didn't want to dent his car. So that's what we call, it's the confirmation bias. So when you develop this unconscious bias over the years, you immediately think a certain behavior, certain culture is all bad, period. This is beyond just being generalization. You just had this concrete fixation in your mind. When you see certain people with a certain attitude and behavior, you think they're just bad people. Well, you don't believe me? Let me show you. I want you to take a look at it and just be honest to yourself, how you feel about people that you're about to see. Okay? That was actually the test they did. Let me stop this one here. You don't need to see all that. Okay. All right. So that was actually done in Brussels, Belgium. They tested 100 couples, and only 12 couples, actually made to their, 2 empty seats. Rest of them all walked away. And out of 12 couples, 7 couples led by a woman. The lady dragged the man actually to walk, and to sit there. And the men were more resistant to sitting among this all, what do you call, skinhead and the tattoos, and looks like, what do you call that? The Angels from Hell motorcycle club, type of, people. Yeah, I'm being a very unconscious bias right now. So this is what happens. Yeah, watching too much movie. Yeah. So we need to stop doing that. We need to really understand people where they're coming from, and their environment, their culture. I'm going to share with you this story as I close. This is quite of an interesting story. I think you will enjoy it. Let's read together. Uh, the rainy season that year had been the strongest ever, and the river had broken its banks. There were floods everywhere, and the animals were all running up into the hills. The floods came so fast that many drowned except the lucky monkeys who used their proverbial agility to climb up into the treetops. They looked down on the surface of the water where the fish were swimming and gracefully jumping out of the water as if they were the only ones enjoying the devastating flood. Well, one of the monkeys saw the fish and shouted to his companion, "Look down, my friend. Look at those poor creatures. They are going to drown. Do you see how they were struggle in the water?" "Yes," the other monkeys said. "What a pity. Probably they were late in escaping to the hills because they seem to have no legs. How can we save them? I think we must do something. Let's go close to the edge of a flood where the water is not deep enough to cover us, and we can help them to get out." Oh my. So the monkeys did just that. They started catching the fish, but not without difficulty. One by one, they brought them out of the water, put them carefully on the dry land. After a short time, there were a pile of fish lying on the grass, motionless. One of the monkeys said, "Do you see? They were tired, but now they are just sleeping and resting. Had it not been for us, my friend, all these poor people without legs would have drowned." The other monkey said, "They were trying to escape from us because they could not understand our good intentions. But when they wake up, they will be very grateful because we have brought them salvation." This is actually, traditional folk tale from Tanzania. They were ridiculing some of the Christians, coming from the Western world to the Tanzania, and completely ignoring Tanzanian culture. I mean, the monkey had a good motivation. They had a very sincere motivation. They want to help these poor creatures without legs, struggling in the water. So they want to, save them. So why did the monkey help the fish by taking it out? Because they thought that's the right thing to do. You just don't look at the people and let people dying in the water. Yeah. What did the monkey assume about fish culture? Well, they assumed that fish culture is no different than monkey culture. In fact, they look at the fish culture as unfortunate culture, hopeless culture, helpless culture. So we need to go and rescue them. We need to go and crusade, lack of a better word. So how do you think the fish felt about the help it received? Yeah, what helped? They were killing fish, taking them out of the water, piling up in the on the sand. So what advice would you give the monkey for further situations where he will like to help? What would you say to the monkey? I would say, stop being monkey. you you have to understand the fish culture. You are in a fishy environment. You have to understand how they see and the function and the behave and their value, their culture, the custom, so forth. But if we just focus on our own preference, remember that intuitive thinking, unconscious bias, we will never able to, develop a relationship with people outside of our own. This is the last one that I'm going to say before I close. Some people think that heaven is where cooks are French, mechanics are German, lovers are Italian, police are British, and it's all organized by Swiss. And they said hell is cooks are British, mechanics are French, lovers are Swiss, police are German, and it's all organized by Italians. Yeah, definitely. This is unconscious bias, intuitive thinking. So we really need to learn how to develop cultural intelligence. You got to have a CQ drive, knowledge, strategy, and action. That's what we're going to talk about it at 10 o'clock. So if you are interested in this topic, please come back. Any question or comments?
No, I think it is 9:45, so we are going to wrap this one up.
All right.
But thank you so much, Dr. Kwon. I love that monkey story.
Yeah.
Every time I hear it, it resonates. Like it makes so much sense. So good presentation, and that ending story was quite all inclusive of what you've been talking about. So that was good. If you'd like to join us back here in 15 minutes, we're going to take a 15-minute break, and we will be back to talk about diversity and inclusion. Learn ways that we can debrief some of our own experiences, develop our awareness for cultural conditioning, and improve our ability to lead increasingly multicultural groups and minister across cross-cultural with cross-cultural sensitivity. So we would love to have you come back and join us in 15 minutes. We're going to take a break, and we'll be right back. Thanks so much.
Okay, good deal.